Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Making History. My name is Brian.
And I'm Katie.
And we're the Hesses. And we have something exciting for you guys. For you who are watching us on YouTube, it's possible you may have seen already. But for those of you who are listening, we have a guest with us today, making his first ever appearance.
Yeah, this is a big deal.
This is a big deal.
First time on the Making History podcast.
Yeah. I'd say he's nervous, but he seems pretty chill, actually.
Yeah, he's maybe a little bit too chill.
So we have Oliver James with us.
Yay, he's finally here.
He's here. And it's so funny because we have been releasing these episodes way after we actually recorded them. And so like the episode that came out last week was recorded on your due date.
Right.
Which was end of June sometime.
Yes. Yep.
And now it's August 16th.
What happened?
Yeah. So we've been releasing episodes every week, but we're just now getting caught up in the timeline to where things are kind of happening.
We're coming out of the baby time vortex where it's like we don't know what time of day it is, what day it is, or what week it is. Maybe not even what month.
I know. Yeah.
Although, this time I feel like the most rested this time around, I think, that I ever have with a newborn, because he has been a champion of a sleeper.
I mean, he just sleeps all
the time,
like
even still.
Through the night. He'll wake up, you say maybe once, maybe twice.
Yeah.
At the most.
Right.
And he doesn't wake up in the night to hang out.
Mm-mm. Like the girls did. I remember they would wake up and they're like, 2 a.m.? Yeah. Let's go out to the living room. Show me all the lights. Let's do this.
Yeah.
He's like, I want to eat. And then I'm going back to bed.
Yep.
I don't want to talk. Don't look at me. Just feed me.
Yeah. So that's been
great.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's not really interrupted him being here. People say, or we've been told that going from 2 to 3 kids is a hard transition.
Yeah.
And I'm sure things will change once he actually gets bigger and he requires actual parenting.
Sure.
But it's been really smooth so far.
Yep.
Really smooth.
Yeah. He's been good to us.
Yep.
And the girls are just totally in love too with him. They think he is like the best thing ever. Oh, yep. He is waking up to say hello himself.
He's got some stuff to add.
Yep. You have some things to add. Has it not been quite as easy for you coming into this world as it has been for us?
So he's 6 weeks old right now. And he's doing great. The girls, like you said, are just obsessed with him.
Yep.
He gets more kisses and touches than he'll probably ever want. But he gets them.
He can't say no right now. So we have to do it for him. And they don't like it.
Right.
The girls... I think they would just be loving on him all day, which is so sweet. It's been so fun watching them. It's like, obviously we've seen Nora be a big sister, but her being older this time, I think has been way more fun, even to see her stepping into like a true big sister role.
Right.
It's been super fun. And Izzy is she's a wild one.
Yeah.
Just loves him and just, where's my Buedo?
Yeah.
Where's my baby Buedo? Yeah.
So it's been super fun to see them. And I remembered that, Nora was about Izzy's age.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
When Izzy was born. Mm-hmm. And I also remembered last week we shared a story, and it was the story of Nora in her room with the gummies.
Oh, yes.
And I realized we got our timeline wrong because she wasn't 3. She was 2.5.
That's true. Yeah.
We moved into this house at 2.5.
Yeah.
Because she had turned 3 that winter.
Right. Yeah.
And so December. She would have been 2, which makes that story even funnier.
Right. Because she was so little. That is so wild to think about.
To be so clever.
Yeah. Yeah. Younger than Izzy, which Izzy has that cleverness and that a little bit of sneaky in her. But she, I think, already she's not very good at waiting for her for her treat.
But anyways, yeah. So Nora, and if you haven't listened to last week's episode, Katie shared a really funny story. So go back and listen to that.
Yeah, that was a highlight of parenthood.
It was good. So yeah, Ollie's doing well. We're adjusting well.
Mm-hmm.
It's not been a hard transition so far.
Yeah.
Which is good.
Yep. It's been great.
Yeah.
Loving it.
Yep. On this episode, let's go ahead and talk about childbirth.
Yeah.
And we're going to take kind of a break from our regular content.
Mm-hmm.
And because I know you love talking about, you just love pregnancy, you love childbirth, you love all that.
I do. Yep.
And you've had some really amazing experiences with childbirth. And one of the things we'll talk about in this episode, I'm going to have Katie share some of her experience, but we're also going to talk about some of the theology of why we believe what we believe about childbirth and experience, because we're interested not just with this specifically, but with every area of our life. We are interested in knowing what's available to us.
Yeah.
How can life be with the Lord? What are there any ways that we have settled for a lesser experience in life than
absolutely.
what He would desire for us and make a way for? And I think that's true for a lot of people in a lot of areas. I think we settle for less than what He would give us.
Yeah.
And one of those things specifically, we've been just kind of on this journey of exploring is, what could childbirth be like for you? And so we'll get into, I guess, just all of your experience.
Sure.
3 kids, because you've had.
They've all been different.
They've all been different.
Yeah. Which, I mean, I'm sure if you have been pregnant or have been around pregnant people, you hear people say like every single pregnancy is different.
Yeah.
And so that's just kind of comes with the territory. But the 3 of these pregnancies have been different for more reasons than just physical.
Right.
Yeah.
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 So talk a little bit about Nora.
Okay. So starting off, Nora, we just had her typical hospital birth. The whole experience, even just like starting with our doctor, I was not in a place personally where I was like a really powerful person yet. And by that, I mean, I didn't do well with confrontation yet. And didn't really know how to stand up for myself in a lot of ways. And I had a lot of opinions about what I wanted the birth to be and the labor and the whole experience. And I made a whole birth plan, typed it up and everything.
Yeah.
So that was, that was
It's
something.
It's so funny to think of like what you do with the first kid versus the third one.
Yeah.
I remember the day before Ollie was born, I was like, what do you do with a newborn again? But anyways.
We'll figure it out. I'm sure it'll come back to us.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had a whole birth plan typed up, all our preferences for how I wanted labor to go, including no epidural.
Right.
I didn't want to have an epidural. I wanted it to be a natural birth in the hospital. And I honestly, looking back, don't really know why that was one of my preferences. I think I just kind of have a weird relationship with medicine in general and just like to avoid it if at all possible. Like I don't take pain medication unless I'm like dying.
In 10 years of being married, I could probably count on one hand the number of times you would ever even take like a Tylenol.
Yeah.
Or an ibuprofen for anything.
Right. Just
you
like,
just won't.
I'll be in pain and he'll be like, you want to take some pain medicine? Nope. It's probably just really stubbornness. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'd like to have a good reason for it, but I think it's just because that's who I am.
Yeah.
Anyways, so the whole birth plan typed up, ready to go, even preferences for what I wanted to happen with Nora afterwards, which I think is wise to do your research, to have your decisions made about vaccines, about eye drops, bath. There's so many things that come after that are like typical for hospital births that I had heard from friends that weren't, like those policies weren't necessary for babies and for moms.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just decided I don't want most of the things. So I declined almost everything that they usually do. And I don't want to get too into detail about that.
Right.
Because that can get, controversial and just out of hand. But anyways, so we had a hospital birth with Nora, and I think this just runs in my family. We carry babies long. And so where 40 weeks is the typical length of a pregnancy, we are around 41, 42 weekers. And so Nora did not come on her due date. Shocker.
Right.
Most babies don't. And my doctor said that she was only comfortable letting me go 8 days past my due date. And I was perfectly comfortable. My pregnancy was great. It was really, pretty easy. I didn't have any really major symptoms.
Yeah.
So I was like, I don't really feel like I need to be induced, but I didn't feel like I had a place to argue with that because it was just like presented, this is what we're doing. You're being induced at 8 days. This is as long as you're allowed to go. And I think I had even pushed for later because I think she wanted to induce at like 3 days past.
Okay.
And I was like, no, I did stand up for that one.
Yeah.
But here we are, 8 days past the due date. We go in for an induction. And I was not really happy with that. I didn't really have a whole lot of peace about being induced, but felt like I had to because that was what my doctor told me to do.
Not being induced wasn't presented as an option.
Right.
Which we were not yet at the point where we were as comfortable pursuing options. And so it's like if it wasn't expressly stated, then it's like, oh, I guess this is just the only way.
This is what we do. I didn't really think another way.
Yeah.
And so we get there, start the induction process. Labor, I think I slept at first before the Pitocin like really kicked into gear. But once it kicked into gear, all peace was out the window. Yeah. And I had really tough contractions. It was not a fun process. Mentally, I was just kind of all over the place. Like I wasn't really able to, I feel like I wasn't even able to communicate well during that time because it would just hurt so much. Yeah. And I was just like, how long is this going to last? It just felt like an eternity. And then I know I got like stuck at a certain point with the contractions and progression. I stalled at like a 4.5 centimeters, I think. And it felt like days that I was stuck there, even though it was just a few hours. But mentally and emotionally, I was like, something has got to give. And so even though one of my bullet points on my birth plan was no epidural, I said, never mind.
Yeah.
Bring me the epidural.
It got really
rough. Yeah, it got really rough. And I knew myself well enough to know that I was not going to be able to calm my body down because what I felt like physically was that I was literally like my whole body was like tensed up, which it was, in a way. And it was just, it felt unbearable. And it felt like I just couldn't do it anymore. And so I just felt really, really discouraged in the process. And I felt a little bit like a failure, honestly, whenever I decided to get the epidural because I had it in my brain. I was determined. Yeah. No epidural. I'm going to do this naturally. I'm going to be one of those strong moms who, can say, I didn't have an epidural, And so probably a lot of it was just my pride was hurt because, I had set myself up for failure because I didn't really have a good reason for not wanting an epidural other than
just to be able
to say it.
Yeah.
And, so we got the epidural. And then after that, things were smooth sailing. And it was, honestly, it was a great experience after that.
Yeah.
Because I didn't feel anything.
Yeah.
And part of me was at peace, but, now that I'm talking about it, remembering part of me was not at peace because I felt so powerless.
Well, yeah, you kind of
that.
felt like somebody else was in total control of your life and your decisions.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason why we teach so much on responsibility and like actually taking hold of your choices and being the one directing your life.
Right. Because it feels terrible to be in a situation that like you are the main character, but somebody else is calling all the shots. It's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
You said that I don't actually like that, but then it's kind of too late to do anything. Like,
And so, and there were like several things with being induced that like you weren't wanting to happen. That wasn't even communicated. Like they came in and wanted to break your water and like do all these things. It's like that wasn't communicated, but it was, they kind of presented it like, this is happening. I don't really care what you like or what you want.
Yeah. I mean, they were, you know, they were doing all those things. And it's not like they were doing it with malice or, you know, bad intent. It was just they're on a schedule. It's a hospital. It's a business. And they have a way that they do things. And that's great. That's how they're meant to run. No bad feelings there. But it did feel bad in the moment. Of just like, okay, you didn't talk to me about this. Why are we just all of a sudden, why is this being presented as like, hey, we're doing this now? Whereas like maybe, you know, maybe it was my bad of not asking the question, but also I feel like as a provider, that's their job to communicate everything.
Right. So yeah, I just remember thinking like leaving the hospital, and it wasn't a bad experience.
No.
There was nothing traumatic.
Right.
There's nothing we look back and think like, oh my gosh, that was the worst experience.
Yeah.
But it was just like this feeling of like, this can be different, I think.
Yeah. Like hearing people's stories about, you know, different ways that they did birth, which we'll get to in a second. I was like, man, I feel like I didn't have as good of an experience as I could have had. Yeah. And so looking into the different options is what led us to make a different decision with Isabel.
Right.
And so going into her story, to culminate Nora's story, we had a healthy and happy baby, and it ended well. We had a happy ending. And so, you know, good there. But with Izzy, you know, I had shared my story with some friends, and I know a couple of them had been like, well, have you ever considered home birth? I was like, no. Why would I do that?
Yeah, I'm not a psycho, so no.
There's hospitals for that, you know? Like, no. I'm not, like, I wasn't born in the 1400s. Thank you. But I, you know, gave them their space to share their stories because I was curious. I was like, okay, well, like, why did you do home birth and what was it like? And all of the stories were so similar. Like, yes, it was still a birth. It was still a really like intense physical experience, but there was a common denominator among the stories of just how peaceful it was and how empowering it was to have a baby at home, and just really, I feel like people would present it as like a joyful experience. And I was like, that was not my real experience in the hospital.
Right.
Like I didn't really have a whole lot of fun with it. But with their experiences about home birth, I was like, okay, well, maybe this is something I want to look into, because that experience that you had sounds like something that lines more up with what I feel like birth can look like.
Right.
And what I would like birth to look like for me. And so, you know, we did some research, just got more personal stories, and found a midwife that we loved and had high recommendations from people that we know and respect and trust. And so we started meeting with her, and it all felt completely different from the get-go, because first of all the appointments were not in a hospital building. They were in a house. Yeah. And so I was like, is this real? Like, are we allowed to be doing this? Because when you start going like against the grain of what is typical, it feels like you're doing something wrong. Right. A little bit, but it feels really right at the same time. Yes. Because I remember we just had so much peace throughout the entire pregnancy. But yeah, so everything was just, I feel like we were really stepping into a new place of being led by peace, where it felt like the worldly part of my brain felt like this is not how we're supposed to be doing things, but my spirit was so at rest.
Yeah.
And so at peace. And so all the weeks leading up to labor were amazing. I had 0 bad symptoms. I know we'll get into this a little bit more probably in our next week's episode, but we set ourselves up for success in all the ways that we could spiritually by really diligently praying over every aspect of pregnancy, how my body functioned, how the baby was growing, and would speak life over the pregnancy. And I think we did that a little bit with Nora's pregnancy as well, but it wasn't quite as what's the word?
Intentional.
Yeah, it wasn't quite as intentional. Yeah. And it was broad. I hope I have I pray for a happy, healthy baby and an easy pregnancy. But it came more to life for us and for me, just really pinpointing each part of it.
Right.
And really walking myself through what labor was or would be, and declaring life over each part of it, because I think that kind of helped me get my game face on a little bit more, of just being okay, this is actually a beautiful part of labor. This isn't the hard part. This is actually propelling me into bringing a new life into this world. Every contraction is actually progression. That was one thing that we, instead of calling them contractions even, we called them progressions, I think. Mm-hmm. And so even just those mindset shifts were so helpful along the way. And when labor did come with Izzy, it wasn't grueling. It wasn't awful and something that I just felt like I had to get through. I felt this excitement the entire time of okay, this feels brand new. This feels like a completely different experience because it was a natural labor. It was not induced. Mm-hmm. It wasn't brought on by anything other than my body being ready and the baby being ready to come. And
and I think too, what's happening with our experience is that we were moving towards, and this was intentional, we were moving towards the goal of experiencing childbirth as the Lord designed it and intended it. Because I think that mindset was absent with Nora. Yeah. It was just, you have a baby and you have it the way you have it. Where in the hospital with the way they tell you to have it. Yeah. But I think what we had been intentional, and I say we, as if, I was there and I was a part of the... Oh,
you were a part of it.
I like the theology of it. And I like the, I'm interested in mind, the renewal of the mind.
Right. Yeah.
The connection between belief and experience and expectation. And we'll talk more about that in probably next week's episode, like you said. But I think with Isabel, we were being really proactive about setting ourselves up to have an experience that is more in alignment with what we believe the Lord's intention and heart is for childbirth.
Yeah, and I think it was a difference too of where with Nora's pregnancy and labor and delivery, we invited the Lord into all of it. But with Izzy and then with Oliver, which we'll get into in a second, we let him lead. Yeah. We invited him to lead the pregnancy and the birth experience. And so I think it's a difference of inviting him, but we didn't really seek his guidance in it as much as we did with the other 2 pregnancies.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So with Isabel, it was a much better experience.
Yes. Much better. So much peace the whole time. There, like I mentioned, there was a lot of new feeling because everything with Nora's labor was induced by medicine. And so labor didn't start on its own. And so none of the typical signs of labor happened. And so with Izzy, we were kind of like, oh, okay, is this a sign of labor? Is this a sign of labor? I don't know. I almost felt like we were first time parents again.
Yeah.
Just in that respect of like birth and labor and all those things. And so I woke up and labor was in process. And I was like, oh, okay, so this is what natural labor is like. And so instead of like just waiting for the medicine to kick in, I just woke up and my body had done it on its own. And so I was like, okay, so this is what it's more intended to be like. And it just felt so much different physically and emotionally, because while you can prepare more for an induction, it almost feels like when you have an induction, you're just like anxiously waiting rather than like when labor starts on its own, you have an anticipation, but it's with an expectation that like my body knows what it's doing.
Right.
Rather than like, okay, what is this medication going to like spur on?
Right.
And so it just felt, I mean, I feel like I keep saying it just felt so natural, but it did because it was.
Yeah.
And then we had a doula with Izzy as well, which highly recommend even if you have a hospital birth, have a doula, because when you're in the middle of it, you're not really, like, even if you are totally at peace, it's helpful to have a third person to remind you to stay in that peace, because they're much more removed from the whole experience and able to think a lot clearer.
Yeah. So our doula is a good friend of ours, and she is like an unbelievable steward of the peace and presence of God. And I remember with Isabel, when she got there, things were like a little tense. You were a little tense. You were kind of sitting on your yoga ball rocking quickly, and your shoulders were up. And I remember she walked into the room and it was like everything changed. The whole atmosphere in the room shifted.
Yep.
And she just brought peace, and, it was just kind of centering us back to an awareness of the Lord's presence and his goodness in the midst of, your experience.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she walked in, peace exploded.
Yeah.
And then from there, honestly, like the whole time, even when contractions got more intense, I felt just so at peace. Everything felt really like just exciting and joyful and good rather than like, oh, when is this going to be over? It was just like I was just along for the ride, and I don't think I ever really got to a point where I felt like I can't do this anymore. It was just like, yeah, this baby's coming soon. Yeah. And I'm here for it.
Yeah. And it happened quick.
It did.
It was 3 hours between when you woke up and when Izzy was born.
Yep. And I think a huge part of that was just because we were able to maintain that state of peace. Yeah. So I was able to keep my body relaxed. I was able to speak life in those moments rather than like, I just hate how this feels and I just want to get over it, because that doesn't help anything along.
Yeah. And so, the whole thing was just surrounded by prayer and declaration and just, remaining focused on, God and his goodness and his peace and his presence.
Yep.
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 And
allowing him to lead us through the whole thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. And even as great as Isabel's experience was, now we've got Oliver.
Yeah.
And that was being in the room for Oliver's birth was the only way I can describe it, is that it was supernatural. It was the most peaceful. I mean, I don't know what a more peaceful childbirth would look like.
Yeah.
I don't even know.
Yeah. And I'm just starting to get teary-eyed now talking about it, just thinking about just how thankful I am that like we have, we've worked hard to get to a place of trust and leaning on the Lord. And I can't say that we do it perfectly. Because there are moments of, still questioning or being stressed out or whatever. But in those moments, and in his whole labor and delivery. Like I agree. Even being the one giving birth, that's all that I would describe it as, is peaceful and joyful and just holy.
Yeah.
Really, because there was never a moment that I was like, oh, I wish that I didn't have to do this. It was like, oh, I get to do this again.
Yeah.
And I get to have this experience, this amazing experience of bringing a new baby into this world and being a mom again. And yeah, it just felt, I wish there was like an easy way to like truly let everybody experience what it felt like in that room rather than just describing it, because it really just was so peaceful.
Yeah.
And it never, I feel like even with Izzy's birth, while we were really prepared and like at a good place spiritually and emotionally, Deb, I think, still had to, our doula had to remind me, you know, relax, deep breaths, slow breaths.
Right.
You know, remind me to return to peace a lot more. But with Ollie's birth, I honestly don't think she did at all. Maybe once or twice that she had to like kind of like towards the end where she like would come and like kind of rub my back of like, just release the tension, you know, deep, slow breaths.
Yeah.
But it was less of that like coaching through like it was with Izzy, and more of just, you know, praying into the peace that was there and just thanking the Lord for the process. And I just like the whole time during Oliver's labor, like we were talking and laughing and, you know, once maybe like the contractions that were like 10 minutes before he was born, I kind of had to concentrate a little bit more on, you know, just thinking through the contraction, you know, and breathing through the contraction. But other than that,
it was only a handful of contractions that you weren't, that you, like you said, like there were only a handful of them that you had to kind of like disengage from the conversation and focus to get through. It was just like a few of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe like 2 or 3 towards the end. And then I was like, oh, I think it's time to push, which that was another thing that was new with Izzy, that like reflex that was just another part of learning new things in birth and allowing, you know, my body to do the work itself, because surprise, your body is going to get the baby out when you're ready. It's not something that you have to make happen.
Yeah.
And, you know, there are some cases where, you know, the baby really just is so cozy and just really doesn't want to come out. And then you have to like, you know, there is a need for induction. Yeah. But most of the time.
But when the baby's coming, you like, I remember just thinking that was so funny, because the only concept I had for giving birth was, you know, you breathe a certain way and you push at a certain time for exactly as long as the doctor tells you. And that's how you get the baby out.
Right.
But with Isabel, it was like, she's coming. Nobody has to tell you to push because she's coming.
Yep.
You know, and it was the same way with Oliver.
Same thing.
Like midwife isn't telling you to push and how and when, because your body just did it.
Yep. My body is like, we're pushing this baby out, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
Ready or not, here he comes.
Yeah.
And so that even just adds an extra level of just comfort and peace going into a labor and delivery, just knowing that like your body is actually made for this. The Lord designed women to be able to have babies.
Yeah.
And so why would he design us with that intent in a way that didn't happen naturally and beautifully? Yeah. Because everything that he makes is beautiful and everything that he does is good and intentional. And so when we allow him to truly lead us through that process and really invite him to be our guide through the whole thing, that's when it can become just a whole place of peace and a whole place of just true rest, even through one of the hardest physical times of your life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Yeah, I think maybe that's a good distinction to make, is that, with Nora, our firstborn, the Lord was, like you said, he was invited into the process,
Mm-hmm.
but the whole event was centered around labor
Yeah.
and probably how hard it was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of almost reactively prayed.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, as we progressed to Isabel and then through Oliver, we kind of learned how to center the whole experience around the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, like he led, his presence, his peace led every aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, we experienced what, you experienced, what we were pursuing, which was a supernatural childbirth.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say this too. We had a friend recently give birth in a hospital and have a very, very, very similar experience, that it was peaceful. It was filled with presence.
Yes.
It was very supernatural. And so this isn't our way of saying you're out of God's will unless you have a home birth.
Yeah.
That's not what we're saying.
Right.
We prefer home birth, but
but that's because we are us. And if you prefer hospital, that's amazing.
Yep.
Go have your baby at a hospital. You can still let the Lord lead through that. And it can be an amazing supernatural experience in the hospital.
And, this is all this to say too, is that there are so many areas of our life where we just want to know what's available to us. We want to know, what can life be like with the Lord?
Yeah.
And, within the context of this episode, we're talking about childbirth specifically.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't to say that for people who have hard experiences in childbirth, that this isn't to say that you're lesser than.
Right. Not at all.
And this isn't to shame, but we like exploring the possibility of what kind of experiences we can have in life, and we go after it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because if it's made available to us by the Lord, then why wouldn't we go after that? Why wouldn't we pursue it?
Right.
Yeah. Go after what he has go after every promise that he has for us.
Yeah.
And be able to live in it and thrive.
Yep.
Yeah.
This is kind of what we had believed was possible. And this is what we had been working towards.
Yeah.
And I feel weird talking about this. It's not like I will ever have a baby.
Sure.
And so I
I'll
like,
tell you if you're wrong.
I like the theology of it. I'll never have the experience, but I like the theology of it. And, you and I we have been taught, and you have read books, there's a book called Supernatural Childbirth. And it's becoming, I think, a more increasingly popular topic.
Yeah.
And something that people are exploring. But, when we talk about God's design and his intention for childbirth, to understand that we'll have to visit the Garden of Eden and revisit what happened there.
Yeah.
Because I think one of the misconceptions, and this is something that we talk about a lot at our church, and even our senior leader, Noah, he has taught a lot about this concept that for so long the church has kind of been living and believing as if the Lord is trying to rescue us from the earth, when really his plan from the beginning was that we would be the ones who with him would have dominion over the world, and that we would make this place one that represents his kingdom.
Right. Yeah.
And that's actually still his plan. And he's still looking for people who will partner with him in bringing his kingdom here.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about the Lord's intention, what was his intention for life? What was his intention for our experience to be with him, and with relation to each other, and with relation to the world?
Yeah.
I think you have to look to the garden pre-fall.
Yes.
Because that was how he set things up.
It's the clearest picture of, hey, this is what I want for you.
Yes.
This is what I have accessible for you now again. Yeah.
And so here's this world, and you have absolute dominion over it. And I am delegating my authority to you. And I want you to make this place look like my kingdom.
Yeah.
And I'm here to do it with you. And so pre-fall, things are pretty good.
Yeah. They're doing pretty great.
Adam and Eve have a pretty good situation.
Yep.
And then we know, of course, you get into Genesis 2 and Genesis 3, and then we see the fall. And a few of the things about the fall that we'll mention is that with the curse that came with that, is that he said there will be increased pain in childbirth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what's so interesting about all of this is that based on what we believe about who Jesus is, what he accomplished, and what he actually meant when he said it is finished,
Mm-hmm.
that the finished work of Christ, we are operating with a belief that he has made a way for us to experience life as it was intended,
Yeah.
as it was designed.
Yep.
So that we would be people who are able to live in union with him again.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Removed from the power of the curses
Yeah.
that were, made
Right.
because of man's decision,
Mm-hmm.
and removed from the power of sin, of course.
Right.
And yeah, being able to access and live in those promises and that original design.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, and you brought this up the other day, that it says that there will be increased pain in childbirth.
Mm-hmm.
The implication there being that there probably was some existing,
Right.
I don't know what you would call it. If you would call it pain, if you would call it, I don't know how you put it before.
Just intensity is how
yeah.
I describe it, because really, like, it's just such a different thing than like normal pain,
Mm-hmm.
which it's a different process than how you normally are inflicted with pain.
Right.
So maybe that's it. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the fact that it says increased pain
Right.
does, imply that yes, there is a level of pain, but like we were talking about the other day, like you're pushing a human out of your body. So like it would be
Yeah.
insane
It'd
if
be
there
weird.
wasn't
Yeah.
any feeling involved.
Right.
Yeah,
And so
it's not a big opening. So
And so we never believed that like you wouldn't feel anything intense,
yes.
but we have learned to believe and expect that if that was the Lord's design,
Mm-hmm.
that childbirth would be this holy,
Yeah.
peaceful, presence-filled experience.
Mhm.
That if that was his design, then our question is, well, what does it take to have
Right.
that experience?
Yeah. And the way that we can expect that is because the original design was in the garden. And so it is presence filled.
Yeah.
It was peace filled. He dwelled in the garden with them.
Yeah.
He walked in the garden with them. And so if, like, I imagine, I'm kind of just having this picture in my brain now. It's kind of putting a picture to our beliefs. It's just like literally having a baby in the presence in the garden with
Yeah.
the Lord, just like standing there with you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, hey, we're doing this.
Yeah.
Like he was the original doula.
Yeah. There you go. The
That
original
felt
doula.
weird. That felt weird to say. But like in
Yeah.
a way, because he was in the garden, like he would have been there for it all. And
Mhm.
he is still, of course, with us in,
Yeah.
a different way, through Holy Spirit and his presence. But
And one of my favorite ways to look at this and to bring more understanding to what Jesus did
Mhm.
regarding, sort of reversing or breaking the power of the curse of the fall,
yeah.
is that consider that in the garden, it was fruit from a tree that Adam and Eve ate
Mm-hmm.
that brought the fall
Yeah.
and brought us into a state of corrupted living
Mm-hmm.
and corrupted being. And another one of the products of the fall was the Lord said, from you will toil and you will eat of,
Mm-hmm.
of the fruit of the ground, and
Yeah.
it will produce thorns and thistles.
Mm-hmm.
And what's so crazy is just how intentional he is.
Right.
Is just unbelievable. But
is.
just to know that, thorns were produced by the fall,
Mm-hmm.
and it came from their disobedience in a garden,
Mm-hmm.
eating from a tree. Well, there's a lot of like parallels between what Jesus did and what Adam did.
Mm-hmm.
Parallels in the sense that, and Paul even calls Jesus the second Adam.
Yeah.
Well, their disobedience took place in a garden, and the culmination of Jesus's obedience took place in a garden.
Yeah.
the Garden of Gethsemane.
Right.
And of course, he lived in perfect obedience his whole life.
Mm-hmm.
But it kind of came to this like peak moment where it all culminated to where he, and I don't know how long we've been talking. I feel like I need to say this too, that do you remember the first time we heard somebody teach us on what was happening in the garden?
Yes. Oh my goodness. How can I not?
So there's this, if you don't know the story, I think it's Matthew 26. I think, it's probably in multiple gospels, but there's the story where Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane
Mm-hmm.
and he is sweating blood
Mm-hmm.
and he's crying out to the Father to let this cup pass from me.
Yeah.
And then he says, not, of course, but not my will, but yours be done.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing I've ever heard about that, taught about that, is that he was asking the Father for a way to get around the cross.
Mm-hmm.
Don't make me do it, is what
Right.
it sounds like. And that's how people teach, is that Jesus had this moment of like, I don't actually want to do this. Please don't make me do this.
As
Spare
if he
me.
wasn't part of the initial planning.
Yeah. So the common understanding is that he's crying out to the Father to spare him from the cross.
Yeah.
Because he's saying, let this cup pass from me. And the cup represents his suffering.
Mm-hmm.
But what's happening in the garden is he's actually dying.
Mm-hmm.
He's sweating blood. And there's a medical term for that.
Mm-hmm.
But he's dying. And so he's not crying out to the Father, would you spare me from the cross?
Yeah.
He's crying out to the Father saying, please don't let me die right now. Please help me get to the cross.
Yeah. Oof.
You know?
Oh no. Not gonna make it. Yeah.
But he's not looking for a way out of the cross. He is desperately crying out to the Father, get me there.
Right.
We're so close.
Yeah. Allow me to finish this.
And there's a verse in Hebrews 5:7.
Baby hormones. Can we blame that on this? Or
I mean, I can't.
you
so,
can.
Sure, you can blame yours. But there's a verse in Hebrews 5:7 that says that he cried out with prayers and supplications. He cried out with tears to the one who could have spared him from death. And it says, and he was heard because of his reverence.
Mm-hmm.
And so it says that the Father heard his prayers because Jesus was reverent.
Yeah.
And the thing is that, well, the Father didn't spare him from death because he died.
Right.
He spared him from premature death.
Yeah.
And that was what Jesus was fighting.
Mm-hmm.
He's in the Garden of Gethsemane. He's dying.
Right.
And his cry, the cry of his heart is, Father, we're so close.
Right. Don't
Let me die
yet.
You've got to get me to the cross.
Mm-hmm.
We're so close.
Yeah. Just mind blowing.
Yeah.
And just, if you don't already love Jesus, I don't know how you can't after hearing that.
Yeah. So anyways, that was kind of a side trail, but to say that one of the parallels is that, the fall happened in the garden
Yeah.
from fruit that was taken from a tree. And part of the fall was that it produced thorns.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Jesus went to be hung on a cross,
Yeah.
which is often called a tree, that he was hung on a tree wearing a crown made of that which was produced by the fall.
Right.
Representing, hey, everything that has happened in the world, this corrupted state of being and living that you guys have endured,
Yeah.
that I'm going to hang it back up on a tree
Mm-hmm.
and it's finished.
It's done. Yeah.
And so in me, everything's different.
Mm-hmm.
And his message was the kingdom is here and it's now. And for those of you who will, and he taught his disciples to pray, Father, your kingdom come, your will be done.
Yeah.
And so Jesus is saying, it's finished. The kingdom is here now. Everything that is available, you don't have to wait for.
Yeah.
It's not, you don't have to wait till you die. It's here now.
Yep.
And so part of that for us, and this extends to every area of our life, but for the sake of this podcast, we have considered the reality of that for childbirth specifically.
Yeah. The curse of Eve was also
Right.
brought to the cross.
Yeah.
Why would that one be left out?
Right.
Yeah.
And again, this, in the same way that we wouldn't shame somebody who like hasn't been healed
Sure.
supernaturally, we would never shame somebody
No.
for not having this,
No.
supernatural experience.
Right. And we didn't.
No, because we're all, like I said, the Bible has so many promises. There are so many promises for healing specifically
Yeah.
that we are still learning how to believe. We're still learning what our part is in that process.
Yeah.
And it's the same, I think, for childbirth, that I think there's a lot available for women
Yeah.
to experience childbirth as he designed it and as he intended it. And we get to figure out, how do we get there?
Yeah.
Because the temptation is to allow our theology to be built on our experiences.
Sure.
But the problem is that our experiences and our perception of our experiences, it can't hold up the way the Bible can. And so what happens is we'll have experiences and we'll allow our theology to be built upon our experiences. And then when the Bible says something different, we'll say, well, that can't be true because I haven't experienced it. When
Or
in reality,
even other people's experiences too.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what you and I have been practicing for years now is learning, okay, the Bible says one thing, but my experience says something else.
Yeah.
I don't want to water down the Bible to match my experience.
Right.
I want to know what the Bible says, and I want to learn to believe that and live in such a way that my experience will match what the Lord said is available.
Yes.
Rather than trying to discount or minimize what he says and what he promises.
Yeah, absolutely. It's taking the word in its fullness rather than picking and choosing. Like, oh, I think, this is probably accessible for me, but I don't know about that part. Like,
or healing was just for just for people in the Bible. He doesn't really heal anymore.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of beliefs like that are built upon the foundation of our experience. And it has nothing to do with what the Bible says.
Right.
In the next episode, we'll spend more time talking about expectations. And I think maybe we could talk about the connection between our expectations and our belief.
Oh yeah,
and the relationship between our expectations and our experience, because Jesus taught a whole lot about that.
Yes. Yep.
Cool.
All right.
Good.
Okay.
Well, to all our listeners and all our watchers, thank you. And once again, my name is Brian.
And I'm Katie.
And we are making history. See you next time.